Good. Recording's working. Hello, everyone. My name's Harry Key. I work for CiC. I'm the head of our specialist services department. First and foremost, I'm a psychotherapist. I work individually and with groups, but mostly these days with organizations. And I'm really pleased to present this topic of men's mental health. Over the past few weeks, I've been doing research on the topic to prepare for this. And some of the facts and figures really astounded me, even as a mental health professional. And I think that speaks to a little bit of the primary issue here is around talking up around mental health. The men that I see for mental health support privately or through CiC are the ones that have found the courage, found the way, had the support to reach out and get some support for that. But we know that there are lots of men that don't feel comfortable speaking about it, don't feel comfortable asking for help. So for those of you listening on the recording, we've already started the discussion a little bit, asking people to introduce themselves. I'm going to read a few more of those comments from chat and then we'll get started. So someone's introduced themselves privately and said, my husband suffers from mental health issues which started around 3 years ago. One of the questions I asked our participants today was to tell me a little bit about what interests them about this topic of men's mental health. We've got Steve here from Balfour Beatty, based in the south of London, co-chair of our Gender and Affinity Network. Nice to see you. Hoping to understand more about how I can help others with their mental health, a key issue within the construction industry. I was speaking to an organisation that we've worked with for years here at CiC called Mates in Mind that works a lot around men's mental health in the construction industry. Speaking to them recently and about the potential need for employee assistance programs like ours at CiC to understand the specific stresses and pressures on people within the construction industry, and particularly around that stigma. So nice to have you here, Steve. Neil here from the University of Stirling, long-term interest in men's mental health. I've struggled with anxiety and depression for many years. Thank you, Neil, for your candor, for your honesty. Got Michael here from Imperial College. I'm a parent to a nearly 2-year-old son and very busy with everything, I can only imagine. I'd love some strategies to recover quickly from setbacks, daily frustrations, and to avoid carrying emotional baggage. Beautiful. Coming with that question, Michael. We'll try and address that throughout. But one of the things I'll always talk about is the need for self-care, and how often even just that word self-care for men can mean selfishness. It can mean pampering or things that don't kind of come attached with that traditional male mentality or image, and that can be quite difficult. But just start thinking as a man, what is it that I need in my day? Do I need more space? Do I need more time with my family? Do I need more space and time to exercise, to blow off some steam, things like that? We'll talk about those kind of tools and tips a bit later. Got Beth here. Hello, everyone. My name is Beth from Newcastle. I'm joining because I don't think men's mental health is talked about as much as it should. There's a stigma. Yeah, we're going to discuss that a lot today. We've got Ian from Aberdeenshire, working with North Sea Transition Authority, passionate about mental health, particularly for men. I was depressed for several years, and I think if I had been equipped with more tools, I wouldn't have been quite as bad. Looking to come off Prozac this year. Thank you again for your honesty and good luck. Carl says, Carl from United Learning in Peterborough, like information to help with both my mental health and that of my team. Maureen from Imperial College London, interested to learn more about how to support men with mental health. We've got Sam from Babcock in Plymouth. My husband left me and his children last July after experiencing very stressful experience at work. Started drinking heavily, and myself and the family believe he's having a mental health crisis but will not get any help. It's a story we hear so often, Sam. Thank you for sharing that. And we'll talk a little bit about that throughout this. Someone here is privately saying that they work at a charity, a small team of 10, only one male colleague, but lots of men in their life. As the HR contact in the charity, as a wife, mother, friend, I'm interested in the challenges men face that will help me understand their well-being better, both professionally and personally. Someone here saying, I'm Duffy and I want to learn more to support the men I work with. So nice to see so many people coming here with the aim to support the men in their lives. That's wonderful. We've got Ross from BBFM in Brighton, living with mental health issues for 22 years, very close to me. Was diagnosed with ego-dystonic OCD, which is managed by medication and CBT. Wondering what Balfour has to offer in terms of men's mental health. Well, as a member of staff of any of our companies that we support at CiC, I'll give you a bit of an overview of the support available. Duffy continues, I work in Brighton and Hove and have a son who suffers from social anxiety but won't talk. Um, and Nicholas here from Kolkata, I would like to understand a bit about how to deal with mental health issues. I think I have issues and been drinking and eating a bit too much, but I find it difficult to talk about it. Well, look, you've started, Nick. You started by putting that message in this chat here. You started talking about your mental health. That is for many people the hardest part. And we're going to start with that, really, what we're looking at today. I said at the beginning in the preview here that doing research over the last few weeks to try and understand some of the facts and figures around men's mental health. Obviously, coming from my perspective, I was looking mainly at UK and EU statistics, but I know we have customers and people joining these sessions all over the world. But I think what we should also throw into the discussion here, particularly, is specific cultural views of men and their image and their traditional roles that they play, and what barriers that creates to understanding our own mental health and then seeking support for it. So I start here with measurement of the specifics of men's mental health relies on individuals reporting issues. All of the studies, all of the facts and figures I could see are likely to be related to people that have spoken up about their mental health. But what we know is, with the stigma around mental health, particularly for men, many cases must be going unreported. The facts and figures that we have will only show us those that are willing to talk about it. They won't show us those that never do. And I'm pleased to see that we have some of you here today, some people that are able to say they think or they know they're suffering with mental health issues, but don't know where to talk and don't know how to start. I did find some interesting figures that we do know. A lot of these are tough topics. We're going to talk a little bit about suicide and self-harm thoughts here today. So just prepare yourself if that's a topic or a discussion that's difficult. But if you have any questions about it, please feel free to put them in the chat. And remember, you can always send it as a private message if it feels a bit more confidential. So yeah, men are 3 times more likely to take their own life. I found an interesting statistic to this is that women are statistically more likely to attempt to take their own life. Men are more statistically vulnerable to being successful in that, I guess. Men aged 40 to 49 have the highest suicide rate in the UK. It's a big problem. And this is often people that have not suddenly turned 40 and developed a mental health issue. This is often people that have been struggling with their mental health for years, for decades sometimes. And again, so many of you in the chat saying that this is like you, that you've been suffering for years, decades sometimes. Men report lower levels of life satisfaction. And I think we have to bring culture, we have to bring the world and media and the things that we see in our lives into this. We are told to behave as men in certain ways. We are told certain emotions are acceptable and certain emotions are unacceptable. And when we're sitting here just as a human being, completely devoid of gender and thinking about that, of course I'm going to have the full range of emotions. Of course I'm going to experience happiness, sadness, anger, frustration, tearfulness. Yet culturally, we're told to only express some of those and not all of them. And then this last fact, I think, is a really important one. Men are less likely to access psychological therapies. Only 36% of NHS referrals for mental health support are for men. That's a huge, huge deficit of men seeking mental health support that I'm hoping we can start thinking about today and start considering how we can encourage ourselves as men, but the men in our lives to reach out for that support. And that kind of phrase that comes up, it's okay to not be okay. So I wanted to, sorry, messing up my slides. I wanted to put, as I normally do, some questions to you as an audience, and they usually come up in green at the bottom of these slides. And as I'm talking here about the stigma and why men don't talk about their mental health. I'd love to hear any of your points of view or your questions about this. So please put them in the chat. Why do you think men find it harder to talk about mental health than women? As a man, if you identify as male and you're listening here, what would stop you? What's got in the way of you speaking about your mental health in the past? And yeah, I'd love to just hear your thoughts and ideas on that. And remember, you can always send it as a private comment if you prefer. So, why men don't talk? Societal expectations and traditional gender roles. Now, these will be slightly different depending on our culture that we live in and potentially our cultural background, maybe some things that were set up in our family as well. But largely, there are expectations for men to be strong, dominant, in control. These are not bad things I'm talking about here. Being strong, being able to be dominant and in control are positive things. But they make it really difficult, all three of those things, for me to put my hand up and admit that I don't feel okay. And I'll tell a little bit of a personal story here about how I became a psychotherapist. I was working in marketing, of all places, and here in London, there was a particular event that kind of rocked men in London in a way that I'd never seen things happen before. There was a young man in North London who was shot and killed by the police, called Mark Duggan. And following that death, there was a huge outpouring of grief, of sadness, of lack of control, lack of dominance that played out in a very male way in what the press and the police would call rioting, civil unrest, and all of that. I call it grief. That was the anger stage of grief, as far as I saw it. At that time, I connected with a men's mental health charity called A Band for Brothers. And they'd been doing excellent work in Brighton, Sussex, all around that area for a long, long time. And me and a few other like-minded people thought that this was a really good opportunity to set up something similar for London because of what we'd seen following this death. And we set it all up and ran for a few years. It's still going now. I left it a long while back. But one of the things that really stood out to me is that men have for generations taken on these expectations of society and these traditional gender roles, despite largely the world around us changing. And what that meant is, particularly for men who don't have any male role model, maybe from single female parent households or any positive male role models in their lives, there's no real rite of passage between being an adolescent and being a man, between being told to run free with your emotions, go and explore, make mistakes, hopefully learn from those mistakes and things like that. What there is just a lot of confusion, a lot of isolation, and a lot of abandonment feelings for men. So the idea of the charity was to bring men, young and old, together to try and think about what these rites of passage are. And that was the first step towards me becoming a psychotherapist, basically. Hopefully you found that a little bit of a story interesting. But look, I think that that's a key thing here. That was men grieving, not just men, I will say, but it was mainly men grieving. But that is seen in the world as a violent, terrifying, scary, abhorrent, illegal thing, when they were just expressing that natural stage of grief that we all go through in the only way that felt possible at the time. Nigel's put here in chat, pride, men don't cry. Yeah. Ian said here a really beautiful thing. I found that I had linked my identity and happiness to my job. And when things didn't go well at work, I felt worthless. I think that when we feel like there is a mental health issue, we can become scared that it will reflect badly on us and we'll be penalized professionally. Yeah. If my whole image is in my work and my image feels like it's decreasing, as it does with depression, I'm going to be scared that other people are going to find out. So I keep it to myself. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You've continued there, Ian. Yeah. So we don't talk about it because we're scared of losing our jobs, for instance. Yeah. Nigel says, I attended Andy's men's club. That's fantastic. Sam says he sees himself as weak if he reaches out. Oh, you're talking about your partner. If he reaches out for help, yet will ask for my anxiety pills if he's particularly bad, usually when drinking. Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit about partner relationships later as well. Also, I still link my mental health and self-worth to my job. No family, no personal pride in self. Need some kind of yardstick, so my job's my life. As you say, Ian, if job is rocky, well, self-worth goes out the window. And these expressions are really important. So things aren't going well because I've got no other relief valve, because I've got no other ways that I can talk about my needs, talk about my emotions. I just chuck my self-worth out the window rather than caring for myself because I don't have those pathways to doing so. Thank you, Paul. That's really heartfelt. And thanks for connecting with Ian in the chat there. That's what I was kind of hoping would happen. And look, if you come across someone in this chat who you like the sound of as a supporter, as someone to talk to, please continue with the conversations with each other. Ross says here, I guess I'm an anomaly in essence, as I've always been extremely vocal about my mental health, but I also understand that many men struggle with where to begin to express themselves. So as an anomaly like that, Ross, what I find is really important is to try and think about why. What has made it safe for me to be vocal about my mental health? Because usually that's due to the culture I was around when I was brought up, maybe the family I was in talked about it a bit more. Maybe I've had good experiences of talking out. If we can share those experiences with others, we can help break down these barriers a little bit more. So to go back to my slide a little here, but please keep the comments and questions coming. The less we talk about our negative feelings, the less likely we are to spot we have an issue. And I'm going to go back to Paul's comment here. I'm having a negative feeling about my job, but because I've got nowhere I can go with that other than internally, all of that anger, all of that rage, frustration, confusion is turned inwards, is turned on myself, and I attack my own self-image. Rather than getting angry at the world or, safely expressing my frustration in the workplace, I take it all on myself. It becomes like a cross to bear. And then, of course, I'm depleting my self-worth, I'm depleting my self-image, and I'm less likely to reach out for help because that help feels undeserved. I feel worthless. I feel like I don't have a place in this world. So we can see how easily this can become quite extreme thought patterns because of those expectations. A couple of people have talked about this. If I'm less likely to speak about my mental health issues, I'm more likely to use unhelpful coping strategies, alcohol, drugs, anger, pouring my whole life into my work, things like that. So the reason I've put here in this last comment is I think support should be easy to access for everyone when it comes to mental health. And I know that that's not true. I know it's not easy to access for everyone across the world and in all communities. But the support must also speak to these stigmas. We have to be honest that there are hurdles anyone has had to get over to reach mental health support. But we have to be honest about the specific hurdles men have to get over in order to seek that support. Because if we're pretending that those hurdles don't exist, we're actually putting up more hurdles. We're actually saying your experience is null and void. This is an easy thing to talk about now in 2023. Why haven't you done it already? It's more shame, more embarrassment. Thank you all for your comments in the chat. I wanted to speak specifically about men and depression. And I'd love to hear in the chat again. Sorry, excuse me for my hay fever. I'd like to ask you again in the chat here. What do you think is needed to support men in opening up about depression? Nigel's put a good key here in the chat. I didn't talk at first, but my employer was great and got me support very quickly from CiC. It's really good to hear. Do you remember, Nigel, or do you feel comfortable sharing what felt like the tipping point there? Where did that go from me not talking to that employer being great? Because a little bit in there, we've given all of the power to the employer and CiC for being great, but we've forgotten about what you've done there, Nigel. You've gone from not talking at some point to talking at some other point. And there's something that needs cherishing and celebrating in you that got you there. Ross has put here in the chat, I had a trauma as a child with both my mother and father having mental health issues. Mum had an eating disorder. Dad had PTSD, which wasn't recognized when he returned from a war zone. We've been an extremely open family regarding these issues. So in conclusion, that's why I'm confident in being so open. So there's a lot to thank there from your parents, I guess, from being able to openly speak to you as a young person about their mental health issues. They paved the way for you doing the same. Paul says here, on a related note, I'm morbidly obese all my life. It's now out of control. I'm 41. I'm accessing NHS and other resources, but I'd be lying if I said I felt there's a plan going forwards. Tied in with this for Harry, eating disorder support for men. Yeesh, it's a nightmare. Men don't suffer eating disorders. The media have gendered that so heavily. Yeah, thank you, Paul. Really, really pleased that you had the courage to type that and to speak up about that experience. Yes, eating disorder help needs to be there for men, and very often it's that unhealthy coping strategy. It's I don't know what else to do with these feelings, so I eat. And then sometimes I miss eating and I go back and I back and forth and back and forth. It could be really, really difficult. I'm so pleased to hear that you're accessing the resources now, and Godspeed to you. I hope it goes well. You're on a really tough journey there, but being able to come out and speak about that and your experience there, I think will probably help other people as well. Sam says here, traditionally male-led industries do not provide or incorporate mental health support within their daily routines. Yeah. Again, this is one of the things I was speaking about with that organization I mentioned earlier is, in some organizations, you might be able to rely on the fact that people will tell us when they have a mental health issue. In some male-led industries, you're going to have to be more proactive. You're going to have to inject it into the daily routine. Dan says here in the chat, I've recently been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and hoping this session will help me gain and understand some new tools to help me realize when I feel like it without someone else noticing it before me. Yeah. And look, fear and isolation and a lot of the stuff we've been going through over the past few years will likely have generated more of these mental health issues. So speaking here specifically about depression, the way I write about it is depression isn't different depending on our gender identity. However, the common symptoms that men are more likely to express are directly the symptoms that make it hard to get support. If I, as a man, as someone who is, socially and culturally expected to be strong, in charge, taking control and powerful, if I'm experiencing depression, my go-to response is often irritability, anger, loss of control, risk-taking, or sometimes a bit of shutting down, pouring myself into my work, things like that. What is really difficult about all of those responses is it scares people away. It pushes them away. Anyone who might offer me support, my partner, my friends, my colleagues, random person at the bus stop, is less likely to approach a man suffering with mental health issues if he's displaying these symptoms. If he's showing this anger and frustration and rage out at the world, it's dangerous and feels dangerous to be around. Now, there's a little bit of by design here, right? It's a little bit of kind of, I'm not the biggest fan, as you know, if you've been in these sessions before, of a lot of like evolutionary psychology. But if you think to the kind of the standard response of a leader, leaders try not to show weakness. So instead of showing weakness at a time of depression, I show the wrong kind of power. I show this aggression, this frustration, and that scares people away. Ian says here in the chat, a lot of companies provide some mental health support and talk the talk, but it tends to be lip service. They don't manage or run the business to genuinely support people. Endless reorganizations and redundancy rounds. Yeah, change and uncertainty. Yeah, thank you there. Nigel says here, I found myself growing apart from everyone. no self-worth, overeating. My wife asked me to talk to others about how I was feeling. I talked to my employer, which I put off a number of times. I too am obese and felt bad about how I looked. I'm now engaging with the NHS. So when we engage with our emotions, then we're able to engage with support and other services. And that's why I think that you deserve the gratitude to yourself there, Nigel, because you overcame a lot of hurdles to engage with your own emotions and say, do you know what? I'm not feeling right. I'm not feeling good. And I'm not going to take that out on myself. I'm not going to take it out on other people. I'm going to get some help for that. It's a really difficult thing to do. But what we do know around depression in men is setting goals for well-being, scheduling things in our day, getting that self-care, time alone if that's what I need, time socially if I need the opposite. All of those things sometimes need to be in our diary and scheduled, because when it comes to waiting until I need that help, I'm probably less likely to take it when I'm feeling down, when I'm feeling negative about myself. I'm less likely to get up and go and see some friends. However, if it's scheduled in my diary, if it's a goal, if it's a defined point in the day, I'm more likely to follow that because I've set that myself. Learning stress coping mechanisms. A lot of depression in men comes from stress. As so many of you have said here, pouring yourself into work becoming stressful because of that, and then I become depressed and low because I'm attacking my own self-image. So getting those stress coping mechanisms learnt, I think, is a really, really good start. And the best way of doing that is just take 10 or 20 seconds now. Sometimes these sessions are thick and fast, full of a lot of information because I try and cram all of my excitement to the topic into it. So let's take a sip of water, slow down a little bit. Where do I feel stress in my body? For me, it's usually around my neck or my shoulders. How much of that do I feel today? Can I score that 1 to 5? I'd say about a 3. Managed to create a bit of a spacious day today around this session because I knew I'd need some space for it. But I also know that I've got a lot of stuff to catch up on from the last few weeks because I've been doing a bit of moving about. So yeah, that's probably where I'd say it is. And then what does stress feel like to me? Having my own personal definition of stress. And for me, stress looks like I rush around everywhere. I take no time for anything. I try and do everything all at once, really quickly, snap, 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 fast, get this off my plate. That's not the best way to deal with a busy workload for me. So I need to start recognizing when I'm slipping into that. That's a little bit of us learning our stress coping mechanisms, learning to identify what stress looks like and feels like to me as an individual. Because although we're talking about men's mental health here, we're all slightly different. The triggers for our stress, the way stress feels, the way we display stress to others, it'll be different for each of us. So just take a few moments now if you feel comfortable, just to check in and think, where do I feel stress? Where does that appear in my body? What does it do to my thought processes? Thank you all so much for your comments in the chat. I'll go back to a few of these now. Paul says here, there's a degree, in my honest opinion, with company provided mental health of feeling like a turkey signing up for Christmas. Put your name down as a weak link. In unrelated news, we're reviewing jobs again. Yeah, okay, I see that, Paul. The irony of my typing that in a company provided chat, but it's something I've heard multiple men say in the past about these schemes. So let's try and dispel some of that stigma. First of all, this is a chat provided by your employer assistance program. I do not share any of this with the company that you work for. Secondly, every single piece of support that you get from your employee assistance program, certainly if it's with CiC and should be with any other program, is entirely confidential. The details of the support you're seeking, the fact that you're seeking support, should not and will not be shared with your organization. If you're unsure about that, and if you've heard men say in the past about those schemes, please be a good advocate and remind them of that. We wouldn't have any business at CiC if we didn't provide confidential services. No one would use it. Maybe a few, but very few people would use it if they knew their employer knew everything that they were talking to about us. Some wouldn't use it at all if, as you say, they've signed themselves up as a turkey for Christmas. I quite like that. So, one thing I love to encourage to men, women, anyone is to say, call your EAP. Don't give them your name or any of your details. Just say, can you tell me about the confidentiality of this program? Before I start, I want reassurance that this is entirely confidential. Get them to prove it to you, and then hopefully that'll break down some of those barriers. Thank you for that, Paul. Ross says here, in my personal opinion, the NHS need to listen more to their patients and not blanket them with depression or anxiety. They need to dig to find the root. I understand that the NHS is in turmoil right now, but over recent years, they haven't changed their ideologies. I'm more than happy to be an ear for anyone here that needs to talk. Not sure how I can open lines of communications after this. Thank you so much for offering that, Ross. And yeah, I think you're right. We do need to dig to find the root cause. And the root cause, just like how stress feels, just like how depression feels, will be slightly different for each of us. A few people agreeing there as well. Nigel says, I feel like I'm walking in mud and getting nowhere and sinking. So that feeling is really important. It's really good that you've been able to express that. If I feel like I'm walking in mud and I'm getting nowhere and I'm sinking, I know what I would be doing. I would be screaming for help. I would be worrying about what happens when I sink. I wouldn't be waiting until I sink to try and scream for help, because then my mouth is covered with mud and no one can hear me. We need to ask for help when we start that sinking feeling, when that first comes on. And this is the hardest thing to learn for men. We love solving our problems. We love solving other people's problems sometimes as well as a nice distraction. But first and foremost, we need to come first. We need to be our priority at some point. And what often happens is we assume other people don't care. We assume they don't want to hear it. So we keep it to ourselves. Paul says here, no offense at all attended by Harry, but it's said and concerns people. Thank you. No, this is why we need to speak up about stigma. Very often, stigma should be able to just disappear when we look at the realities, but it doesn't stop us from holding on to those negative viewpoints, even if they're correct or incorrect. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that CiC is entirely confidential if people out there don't believe or know or trust that it is. What's the point in us sitting here and saying, well, we're confidential, we can't help if no one's accessing it, doesn't matter. No, we need to be proactive in promoting that confidentiality and building that trust. Absolutely. Nigel says it's worth making the call. Yeah, it's one more step up the ladder. Absolutely. By the way, I've seen ladders out there that I'm terrified of. Right, I'm just walking around London. Sometimes you see these ladders up the high side of buildings. Why would I try and take that ladder without some help, without some support, without some reassurance that it's safe and that it's okay? We can't do all of these ladders on our own. Paul says, my job and life and leisure is a problem solver. Way easier solving the world's problems than my own. Yeah, it might feel that way. It might feel that way. And I think you're probably right sometimes, because solving my problems involves some difficult self-introspection. And sometimes with that, it comes some really hard answers, absolutely. But I'd rather do it sooner than later. As I've grown in my experience of mental health over the years as a professional, I'd rather address my issues sooner. I don't want any of my issues to be big issues. I want them to be small issues that I deal with often, alongside all the big issues of the world that I try and help with and solve. Ross says here, asking for help is the very first step. It's extremely daunting, but I assure you, it'll be the best thing that you can do. Obviously, I agree, but thank you for putting that in there, Ross. I wanted to talk about this as it's a tough topic, but it comes up whenever you look up any kind of research or information on mental health in men. In 2017, 75%, 3/4 of all suicides in the UK were men. It's the largest cause of death in men under 50. That terrifies me. That's really scary to me. Um, and we see even this is just rates across the UK population. We see even higher proportions in minority communities, even higher than 75%. Number of men having suicidal thoughts doubled between 2009 and 2019. And I think the stress, isolation, and uncertainty of the pandemic has made this worse. It threw a lot of stuff up in the air. Things that we felt were really defined and certain suddenly became very vaporous and uncertain. And again, the stigma attached to mental health for men may prevent us from discussing this early. If I started to feel isolated at the beginning of the lockdown, at the beginning of the first lockdown here in the UK, how might I have felt when it came to the end of it a couple of years later, throughout all those other changes? If I did nothing about it, is it likely to have got better through that period or worse? My guess is that it would have got worse if I didn't talk about it. My question to you in the chat is a tough one here. How do we speak about suicide safely? How do we have an open, honest conversation about one of the hardest things to talk about? And I'm going to share some kind of experience here from the world of mental health. Suicidal thoughts and thoughts of harming ourselves, quite natural. But what often happens with men and with women is that we feel those and we think that there's something wrong. We think we've crossed some border, some thin line, some barrier between sanity and insanity just by having those thoughts. We think we've slipped into something where it's too late. No one can help me if I'm having these thoughts. No one can talk me down from this. It's gone too far. And that's a huge stigma around suicidal and self-harm thoughts, is that it's unspeakable, unaddressable, when in reality what we know is it's quite natural. You think about it. There's a few self-admitting problem solvers in the chat here. If I am trying to solve a problem and there's only one solution I can see to that, why would that not be natural? Now, consider the problem being how I feel about myself, how I feel about the world, how I think others feel about me, and consider the solution being ending my life. Why would that not come up as a natural solution when we feel we're in an inescapable situation? That's how I try and break down stigma around suicide and self-harm thoughts. It's saying that it's natural, because it is. I've had them. Many of my colleagues in the mental health industry will speak openly about having them. But we often shy away from it because it's such an extreme topic and comes with so much of this stigma. So who we got here? Paulin says, as Ross, I can speak out about my history. I'll admit I went for a walk during COVID with a very long network cable on a hunt for trees. The Samaritans, not for the first time, were there. To do it, I feel being open and honest is the only way of accepting we do this. I remember one morning on my way to work looking over bridges, I thought my boss was going to be livid about something. He didn't mention it. I nearly did something quite final over something no one else thought was an issue. Thank you so much, Paul, for sharing that experience. And I think that speaks to hopefully what I was just saying. It's like we come up with it as a solution to these problems. And there's often problems where we feel shamed as a man, embarrassed, like we haven't lived up to these expectations of how we're supposed to be, like we are unacceptable as a man, as a person. We are not performing as we should be. So no wonder it comes up as a solution. I'm really glad you had, within that depth of the most difficult thoughts we can have, somewhere in there, something said, reach out for help, call the Samaritans. We can't do that alone. It's really hard to come back from those thoughts on your own. So for those of you that do feel comfortable, I think my answer to the question there in green is for those of us that are able to be honest about those thoughts and feelings, to be open about them to colleagues, friends, and family, even without someone approaching us to ask sometimes. Neil says here, the last part chimes very strongly. How often depression and anxiety distorts our view of what's going on. Yeah, what beautiful way of putting it, Neil. Thank you. And you can see how not just the mental health issues we face, but the stigma attached to it kind of doubles down on that same thing, right? Our view is distorted because of the mental health issues we're suffering from. Our view of what's possible for us is distorted even further by that stigma. So we're already like way behind pole position of getting anywhere near seeking some mental health support. Ian says here, absolutely, our minds are our own worst enemies sometimes and things get blown out of proportion. Yeah. Okay, lots of people agreeing there. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. I'm really pleased here today that we've been able to have this open topic, open conversation about this difficult topic. And there will be a recording of this session put on our YouTube channel if you feel comfortable sharing it with people, with your friends, your family, your colleagues. I'll put a link here in the chat to our YouTube channel, and hello to any of you watching there on the recording. Well done for making it 45 or so minutes in. Thank you. So what can I do? And this is kind of aimed at the people that said at the beginning that you're here to consider the men in your lives. What can I do to support the men I know? First of all, bring with you, hopefully, some of the understanding that you've gained in this session today. Try and bring with you some of the frustration that you notice about this stigma getting in the way, about how hard it can be for men to talk about these things. I think also take with you the knowledge that sometimes as men, the reactions we have to situations, the symptoms that we display around our mental health will push you away. They are designed to scare people off from helping us. We're not asking for no one to help. It's our kind of way of asking for help, but it comes in very kind of aggressive, anger-oriented ways. And there is this kind of gendered view that like men aren't supposed to cry, but we're allowed to get angry. So we do that. And if you look on the flip side, there's a gendered view that women shouldn't be angry. They should be compliant and peaceful and fulfill those roles. So they're not allowed to get angry, but they are allowed to cry. So just think about how if we could just let men cry a little bit more and women get angry externally a little bit more, I think we'd have a bit more commonality. We'd be able to talk across gender boundaries a little bit more about this. Someone said here privately, it's really frustrating if your man doesn't talk to you about their thoughts and concerns. Talking with mates at the pub may not provide the space, time, and pace needed for such conversations. I don't think it does. I agree with you, to the person who said this to me privately. A conversation at the pub can take many different forms, but if it follows those traditional stereotypes, I don't think there's space for me to talk about my mental health there very often. I don't think there's a lot of people opening up the conversation around suicidal and self-harm thoughts and the anger and aggression of men and how that could be difficult for the people around us. I think that's one of the least likely topics of conversation at some of the pub gatherings I've been at. And I'm a therapist. I go to the pub with other therapists a lot of the time, and we don't talk about this kind of thing. So yes, but can I share that frustration? Can I meet that need for the person? Can I be honest about what I've noticed? Hello, Harry. I've noticed some more frustration and anger in you recently. And that frustrates me a little bit because it makes me feel like there's something going on that you don't feel comfortable talking to me about. But I'm not going to try and solve your problems for you, but I am here to listen and not judge if you feel comfortable. That's my favorite way of approaching these kind of conversations. even though this person might be trying to push you away, try to stay connected. A text, how you doing, or a call can make a big difference to someone who fears reaching out. Often, when I'm suffering with my mental health, I am isolating myself from others by design. I don't want you to spot that I'm not well. I don't want you to spot that I'm failing as a man, that I'm not reaching my potential and achieving at the top of everything I should be achieving at. So just reaching out and offering that chat. Someone that you would usually go to the pub with, maybe go on a walk together. Maybe just try changing the atmosphere a little and say, look, I've done this on purpose. Because I feel like when we go to the pub, we only talk about certain things. But I've noticed that I struggled with my mental health over the last few years. And I wanted there to be space for you if you wanted to talk about that too. Paul says here in the chat, my girlfriend tells me when she notices a change and thinks I need to take antidepressant medication. And I do the same for her. Not judgmentally, just, I've noticed that you seem a little shorter tempered. Maybe it's worth. That is so beautiful. That's so caring and so gentle in the way that you talk about it with each other. I think that should be cherished. Uh, we use this word notice a lot in the world of therapy because I'm taking the responsibility then. I might have been wrong. I've noticed that you seem a little shorter tempered, but it's not to do with my mental health. I'm shorter tempered because this is really pissing me off. Good. Let's talk about it then. Let's talk about what's really pissing you off. Get it out there. Don't let it just kind of boil and boil in our heads because as we know that, we end up turning the anger on ourselves then. Ross says, mine too, Paul. I'm normally very short when I'm low. Yeah. And it's the go-to for men, I think, is we clam up. And then when someone tries to get in through that clamshell, we bite back at them. And yeah, Ross says, but I'm sometimes blind to how I'm reacting. Yeah. Someone says here privately, I think this is harder for older men with traditional upbringing. I agree. I agree with you. I think the more we've been exposed to that traditional cultural view, the more difficult it is. I think that speaks perfectly to the suicide figures in men aged 50 to 59. They see themselves in a world that says our mental health is accepted and allowed, yet was brought up in a way that it wasn't accepted and allowed. So I feel like an anomaly. I feel not allowed as a person. I feel like all these people are telling me it should be really easy for me to talk about my mental health. Yeah, I've got the voices of my parents, my grandparents, and the generation around me in my other ear saying, "Shut up, don't cry, be a man, push through it, go for a drink, scream, shout, whatever it might be else." Yeah, it's really tough. I think you're right. But if we can share that we recognize that difficulty, we can help break down the barrier. If we can share that we've noticed a pattern in someone's behavior, they can disagree with us. I've also put here, find local support groups. I think sometimes it's easier for other men to understand what men are going through. Just in the same way it's easier for women to understand what other women are going through. Gay people, it's easier for other gay people to realize what they're going through and speak to them about it. It is not easy to talk across gender barriers around mental health when the stigma is gender-based. And I'll share a little link to some of those support groups that I find really useful. The other thing we can do is just offer to help them find the support. Just say, look, I know that there's a kind of array of options out there. If you want to sit down and go through them together, if you want me to call anyone on your behalf and check that it's confidential and secret and private, I can do that for you. Just helping, remember, break down those barriers for people. And the hardest pill to swallow, look after yourself. It's so easy to give up on all of our needs when we see someone around us struggling. But if I'm not taking care of my needs while trying to care for someone else, then I'm going to deplete. And I'm not going to be at my best when they do say, okay, Harry, it's time. It's time for me to talk about this. It's time for me to ask for help. And then I'm going, well, get away from me. I'm stressed. I've got enough on. I've got too much on at the moment because I haven't cared for myself. Ian says here in the chat, this is something I know I lack, a sense of male community and face-to-face connection. I have friends, but they're scattered across the UK and worldwide, thanks to the way my job was, but it's hard to know what to do to fix it. It's okay to share that feeling with your scattered friends across the UK and across the world. That's the best thing that I can say, I think, in response to that. Just say, I'm so pleased that I've got this network of men around the world, but sometimes what I really lack is that face-to-face connection. Why don't we all arrange a get-together? Something to look forward to, something to plan, something practical where we can come together and talk about how that feels. It's a vulnerable position to take, I understand. It's a tough one to stand up and talk about, but I'll also share some resources for where you can find those local support groups. Sam says here in the chat, you can offer support, give them ideas on local support, find advice, but if they cannot see that there is a mental health issue happening, they will refuse the help. Watch out for our absolutes here, Sam. I might have to offer someone support 100 times before they take it. That's the sad fact of this. Really, really difficult. But I might need to offer that. Someone said earlier, sinking in the mud. I might need to say to them, hey, it looks like you're sinking in the mud. Do you need a hand? I might have to be prepared for them to wait until they're up to here. And then they go, yes, yeah, okay, yeah, I'll have some help. It's really tough to witness, really tough to be alongside, which is why that last point is really important. Paul says, apologies for being so vocal. Again, another male stigma. No need to apologize at all. Thank you for being so vocal. You'd have helped plenty of others here, but you've certainly helped me make this a more rich session. I do want one more thing out there. In the 80s, I grew up being open about this. In my 30s, I met a very blokey friendship group. I really have found value in both. I've always been in touch with my feelings, but having a mate say lovingly and jokingly, my mum died next to me, it was very graphic. Mate played a video game with me that night. I messed up a save and let a goal in. Sorry I messed that save up. Not the first save you've cocked up today. I needed that black humour. That's me. Blokey mates and support does help, as well as being open. I agree. And I don't see the two as being separate. It's okay to be in touch with your feelings. In fact, if you're in touch with your feelings, the dark humour and the blokey side's much easier because you know when it's appropriate. You know when the right time is to do it. Ian says, defo, Paul. Ross says, I agree, Paul. Meeting it with any type of humour and understanding is therapeutic in itself, yes. But we have to make sure that the humour isn't dismissing the need. That's the one thing to keep an eye out for. If it's all humour, then there's no space for the sadness. If there's no space for the sadness, I'm stuck locking that up for myself. So, for those of you that are here for yourselves, what can I do if I'm worried about my mental health? Talk. Unfortunately, no surprise, coming from a therapist, real conversation about you, your life, your needs, wants, emotions, and difficulties. But start small. Start just like talking about you a bit more in groups. It makes it far easier to notice when things are changing. And I've got more people bought into the idea of who I am, more people who can spot when things are changing. I've said this already, prioritize, put yourself first sometimes. Get creative. Creative stuff is really good for men. That's a very gendered thing, that creativity is for, female identified people, and, practical and physical stuff is for male identified people. Wrong, incorrect, both are good for all of us. So nourish that creative side of you to get resilience and perspective. If you can't talk about your feelings, try writing them down, or drawing a picture, or dancing, whatever helps. Get it out of your brain. Exercise and rest. Exercise and rest deplete our stress levels. The less stress we feel, the less we're going to be taking on ourselves. And last but not least, many more men speak to their partner more than anyone else. Makes it much harder for single people to find supportive relationships with their mental health. So think about the single men in your life. Share with a trusted peer, you'd be surprised. Speak to your friends and family. GPs and EAPs can speak confidentially. If you are hearing stuff around suicide, self-harm, one of the participants here talked about the Samaritans, but in the UK, accident and emergency departments can also help with in-the-moment risk. And there's a kind of URL there for the support groups that I found. Let me just copy and paste that into the chat so that you'll have that link. And that's arranged by Mind, just really good kind of men's peer-to-peer support groups. I think is a really good place to start. I've taken us right up to time. So just a brief reminder, CiC is here for all of us. So go and have a look at Well Online. That'll give you the best portal into our services. You can sign up for our newsletter, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and just stay in touch with us. I've got a few more last questions in chat, but before we end the recording, I'll spend a couple of more minutes with any of you here that have any lasting questions. I know many of you will have to rush off to other meetings. Try and take time for yourself today. That's all. That's the only ask. Whether you were here for yourself or here for other people, just try and take 5 or 10 minutes to consider your own self-care needs. I'm going to stop the recording now. So for those of you watching on YouTube, thank you very much for being with us.